Today we're going from a study of Genesis. We're going from the study of Genesis to the book of Exodus, chapter 2, 1 through 10. And it's the birth of Moses. In our second unit, the theme is out of slavery to becoming a nation. But our theme today, if you had to pick up one word to describe our lesson, it'd be compassion. But it's not only caring for someone else, it's actually doing for someone else, even at a great personal cost. In Genesis, we started with Adam and Eve, of course, and Jacob's, all the way to Jacob's death and then Joseph. In Exodus, we study God's deliverance of his people from slavery in Egypt. And the central figure in the deliverance, of course, is Moses. Now, we learn in Moses' life, out of the ordinary comes the extraordinary. Elizabeth Hanford Dole had a book called Heart Touched with Fire. And in it, she put a lot of the passages that she found inspiration from. And one of them was from Justice Lewis Hand. I think he was on the Supreme Court. And he said, it's not the extraordinary people who do ordinary things. It's the ordinary people who are rising to the occasion and do the extraordinary. And that's certainly the case in Moses. Now, who's Moses? It's a personal name meaning drawn out of the water. Now, in Exodus, we know that Moses is a great leader of the Israelites in their exodus from Egyptian slavery and their journey through the wilderness. They're challenged by incredible hardships. There's not enough food. There's not enough water. They have to fight a battle. All of this, wandering around for 40 years. But through Moses, we have given to us the 10 Commandments and a covenant binding us to God. Now, how did Moses rise from the ordinary to the extraordinary? Now, his early life is described in our text, and it's Exodus 2, 1 through 10. And I quote, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw that he was a fine boy, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of the Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her attendants walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. This must be one of the Hebrews' children, she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. Now, our lesson guide tells the story, the background story to the text. The descendants of Jacob had been living in Egypt for almost 400 years. And they came to Egypt after Jacob's son Joseph was sold into slavery by his resentful brothers, the coat of many colors. And of course, when there's a famine in the land, they go to Egypt to seek help. But by this time, Joseph is a person of influence in the Pharaoh's court. They don't even recognize him at start to begin with, and then they do, of course. Now in Egypt, Joseph rises to the position of influence in Pharaoh's court, After his brothers came to him due to the famine, he welcomes them, and they return to Egypt. They multiply, and after years, the Pharaoh became apprehensive of them. He was apprehensive of such a large group of non-Egyptians living on Egyptian land. And he was worried that at some point they might overthrow him or his dynasty. And to control the Jews, he decided that, first of all, he would take them and force them to labor, forced labor, to build public monuments. And the theory was that exhausted people are not going to be able to procreate so, fast. But he was wrong, and it didn't work. The population continued to increase. Next, he ordered 2 of the midwives who would help the Hebrew women at the time of their delivery. And he ordered them to kill any male child. And of course, that did not work because they formed a relationship with people. They just couldn't do it. And next, the Pharaoh, when all else failed, wanted and just had all the male children that were born to the Hebrews killed. And that's the story behind, Moses. Why the mother hid him, trying to protect his life. Now, our lesson focuses on Moses' earliest life, and but it doesn't show the events that happened afterwards. Now, first of all, out of fear of the Pharaoh's command to kill all mothers, the mother hid the child for almost 3 months when it was impossible to hold him out any longer. Out of fear of being found out, she built a basket, an ark, and waterproofed it. Now, she took the basket out to the river where the Pharaoh's daughter bathed and put the basket in the reeds. She left her daughter there to watch over the basket. Now, when the Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe, she saw the basket in the reeds, natural curiosity. She opened it, discovering the baby, and she took pity on the child. She recognized it immediately as a Hebrew child. She took the child to the palace. Now, Moses' sister approached the daughter, the Pharaoh's daughter, and offered to obtain a wet nurse among the Hebrew women. And she got actually the child's true mother to wet nurse the child. And she kept the child until the child was weaned. She then, and apparently she was able to take the child back home with her. But when the child was weaned, she took the child over to the Pharaoh's daughter, who raised the child at the palace. Now, as an adult, it seems the young Moses knew his true origin. That's the thing. He's in the Egyptian palace. How does he know about the Hebrews' background, their traditions? But he does. And then, of course, you have the next important incident in Moses' life. He visits a forced labor camp, and he sees one of the Egyptian overseers cruelly beating one of the Jewish workers. And with that, Moses kills him. Pharaoh hears about it. And so Moses flees for his life. And he flees to the land of the Midians. And it's there that another incident involving violence occurs. There's some women being molested by some shepherds at a well. And so Moses immediately takes the woman's part, drives them off, and helps the women. Well, the father of one of the women who Moses has saved is very thankful. And he gives Moses one of his daughters in marriage. They later have 2 sons. Okay. Now, Moses' life seems to fall down into 3 40-year periods. The 40 years to begin with at in the Egyptian palace, the 40 years that he spends with the Midians, and then the 40 years in the wilderness. It seems to be neat blocks. Now, what lessons do we draw from the story of Moses' early life? And first, we learn that Moses has a very keen sense of justice and injustice, and particularly involving others. But there's an issue. And the book, our Sunday school lesson guide, notices this. To what extent is violence, including murder, justified, even when helping someone who's oppressed? Now, our lesson guide kind of skips over that. It says that's not really the point. Society is still grappling with that issue. It still does today. At what point do you use violence? And so they say what's important about the murder is that Moses was compassionate toward the worker who was being mistreated. And so that's really the central theme, I suppose, that certainly our lesson guide takes. It's the theme of compassion, of doing for other people, caring for others to the point where you put your own life at risk. Now, there are 5 women that acted out of compassion to save the child. First of all, there's the 2 midwives who refused to kill the male child. There's the mother of the child who wanted to save the child no matter what. There's the sister who stays with the basket to see that no harm comes. And then finally, there's the Pharaoh's daughter who pities the infant when she sees them. So compassion is certainly a central part of the story. The powerless protected the vulnerable who were being oppressed. Now, our lesson guide asks us a couple of questions. And I usually don't ask for a discussion, but I think I will.
So good.
I don't know if it's good or not. Is there a key event in our lives that help us to be what we are today? Whereas one point happened in our lives, and then it changed everything. From that point on, our lives took a different direction. Anybody want to volunteer? Come on.
Well, sometimes a serious health event can really get you to change behavior or your perspective or whatever.
It really does. And it's interesting you said that. That certainly happened in my life. I was in a grinding automobile accident in my senior year in high school. Reconstruction surgery, crushed in, 15 fractures. I was a 1/4 inch lower, teeth all knocked out as a permanent bruise. And God, Pete, we were coming, there were a bunch of us guys coming back from the county fair. We weren't misbehaving. We didn't go to those special shows, you know, that you were supposed to go to. And so, when we got out of the show, as I was saying, when we got out of the show, we had dropped off 2 of the guys, and we're going down Sunset toward 150. There's a bike there, and the brakes failed. And we weren't going fast when a car hit, when you hit an immovable object like a bank, you know, you're going somewhere when there's no seat belts or anything else. I tried to eat this metal dashboard on the 56 Pontiac and didn't succeed. And so at any rate, I was able to stagger out of the car, and the arm was split, you know, spiral brake, it was just hanging down. And I went up and climbed the bank to the house, the one with the curved door. And the door opened, and Mrs. Yunt was there, and she saw me. I had been wearing a white jacket, which was white no more. And she said, "Come here, sit down in this chair." It was in the foyer. And I put my head down, and that's the last thing I remember before I woke up in an ambulance speeding toward the hospital. And I said, "Is this a Lyerly ambulance?" And the guy from the rescue squad says, "No, you want us to let you out?" I declined. So at any rate, they couldn't stop the hemorrhaging or anything else, and her lips were torn up. And so at any rate, they put me on an ambulance early the next morning to go to Charlotte. And a life-changing event. The reconstruction surgeon, this guy named Franklin Altani. I'll never forget him. And he made the incision in the wrinkle of the eye and then pulled that down and then set all the bones. And the hard palate had been torn down the middle, so he got that with metal things and a metal brace. It was fascinating the way he did it. But at any rate, I must have been in the hospital there for 2 or 3 weeks. But my life changed at that point, and really, and I still can't account for it. I really, what had happened, I had a terrible time in school, failed the 6th grade. She passed me anyway because she didn't want to see me again. And understandable. And in high school, I was so miserable, I just stopped going. And I stayed out, played hooky for 26 days, and then I was caught. And then there was unpleasantness. And so I failed 2 subjects. I'd gone to summer school 2 summers, just about all the grades were D's. I didn't expect to pass. And I had to have chemistry. It was a junior course, and I was taking it my senior year. And Joe Lowry was teaching it. I'll never forget it. And I had a failing average. It was it. There's no doubt about it. I was going into the final, and I sat down, and I thought I was in the wrong classroom. The darn final was written in Greek. I don't read Greek. Reading English was hard enough. I left half of it blank. There's no way I could pass. And so I went home and told my parents I'd failed chemistry. It'd be a 5th year in high school if they didn't have anything in summer. And boy, they didn't want to hear that. And so at any rate, a friend of mine said, you better get over there. He's posting grades. And there on the little slip outside the chemistry lab was by my initials, D minus minus. He had passed me. And I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even gotten the graduation robe. I had to borrow a choir room to graduate. And so at any rate, the next morning, right after graduation, I went to work at the Milford Hills Amoco gas station, where McDonald's is now. That was my first job. And so at any rate, things changed after that. There's no real explanation for it. And I'd never taken the college boards or anything else. And Chubb Richards did a kindness. He and his wife Elaine, after the Second World War, there was a housing shortage. So they rented a bedroom from my parents. They lived about a block and a half from campus. And later, Chubb was serving as dean of admissions. Guess who got in? I had photographs of them hanging my diapers out on the line, he and Elaine. But at any rate, but things happen in your lives that changes. And I thank God just about every day for, the kindness that had been dealt to me. Has there been any time in our lives, the book asks, where you've seen a kindness, whether you've given a kindness to someone or knew of a kindness that someone has done for others? And there's one incident I've talked about before. It happened back it would have been in 1948, 49. My father was in the florist business for about 7 years, and it was Christmas Eve, and my father was closing up shop. It was right beside the Capitol Theater then. And one of his friends came in and had this big package, and it had a very expensive doll in it. And he told my father, he said, look, 2 people in the family got the same doll for my daughter, and I don't need the other doll. Do you know of a family who's got a little girl who would appreciate the doll? Daddy didn't know anybody offhand. He called one of the preachers from out in the county, and the preacher said, actually I do. There's a family where the father's a drunkard. There's domestic violence going on. They've got a little girl. She's not going to have any Christmas. And the guy spent every bit of it on alcohol. And so Daddy said, well, look, let's go out and give the doll. So the minister and Daddy take the doll. And they go out unannounced to the house on Christmas Eve to give the little girl the doll. And she can't have been very old. And Daddy said that when the little girl saw the doll, she grabbed the doll, hugged it, patted it on the head, was laughing and crying at the same time. She'd never been given anything like that. And so the minister got the father aside and said, now listen, said, you're going to be tempted. It's an expensive doll to sell that thing for alcohol. Said, don't you dare do it. Said, I'm going to come back here and visit you periodically to make sure that child still has that doll. And, you know, I've thought about that incident time and time again, usually around Christmas. And that little girl was given that doll when she'd never had anything so fine in her life. And I wonder what happened to the little girl after that. Don't know the names. But she was more apt to have treated others kindly. Wouldn't you think that later in life, she would know what it meant to her and she would be kind or compassionate towards somebody else? And I guess that's what resonates in this lesson most of all. Kindness to others, even at a cost. And we want to do that in our own lives, where we're kind to other people. And in conclusion, in our lives today, we need to care for others as Christ taught us to care.
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you.